Hi, it's Chris with Sanderson Test Prep, and in this quick teaching tip, I wanted to talk a little bit about board work. So, two key principles that I'm going to point out about that way we can interact with the board effectively to also make sure that it's effective for our students. So the first thing I want to point out is when you're putting problems up on the board, the way that you space it out, try to leave enough space to put two problems up at a time. And you're going to be standing in front of the board typically, so I usually try to leave a little bit of a buffer on one side of the board that's about equal to the amount of space that I would likely stand in front of, and that way you can feel comfortable standing up in front of the room, interacting with your students, and know that you're not blocking any key information that's already up on the board behind you. So a lot of times if we just fill the entire board and then we have a tendency to stand in front of it or we're moving around in front of it, students are kind of trying to see and a lot of times maybe asking their friend, wait, what does it say? I didn't get to write that down. He's blocking it. So you want to make sure that you give yourself a little bit of space, and you can mark it off or not. I just did that for our exercise today so that you can see that as long as you give yourself a foot or two to one side of the board, and you can adjust that depending on the size of your board, the size of your room, and the size of your class. But you want to make sure you give yourself a little space so that you can stand in front of the board without blocking anything essential. Now the next thing, once you have your couple problems up on the board, when you go to finish a question and move on to the next, try to erase just one question at a time so that you're always leaving up the work for the previous problem. And the reason that that's so important is that it really prevents the number of times that students have to ask someone else a question or raise their hand and ask you a question in case they missed something. So something as silly as just not having written down the answer to question one, even if a student understood the explanation, if you've already erased question one and you've just got question two up, then that student's going to have to interrupt the class to ask that question as opposed to being able to look up at the board and say, oh, whoops, I forgot to write down the answer to number one. Okay, got it, next question. So try to leave up two problems at any given time if you're covering something in math. And then if it's, let's say like an English, psychology, history-based class, just make sure that you leave up the last two things that you covered. Even if it's a conceptual topic, try to leave up two things with the key information so that students can look up and see that even after you've moved on and started talking about something new. So we're going to work through these questions. I'm going to show you one thing that I like to do when it comes to color coding. So anything that a student is going to have to input into a question, I use blue and I use black for the original question. So this is like what a student would see in their textbook. And then as you work through this with the students, and again, I've shown other videos where you want to bounce around the room, call on students by name, and ask them to participate in coming up with the different pieces. So you subtract 4 from both sides. You get 3x is equal to 12, divide by 3, x equals 4. So through that solving of that question, you'd be calling on different students. Hey, Laura, what's our next step here? Great job. After we subtract 4, Zach, what do we get? Oh, we get 12. Good job. Stacy, what do we do next? Divide by 3. That's awesome. Okay, Mike, once we divide by 3, what's our final answer? X equals 4. Great job. So you want to invite as much participation as possible. Go ahead and use meaningful colors. So if you have black for the problem and blue to show what the students should be writing out, then it makes it that much more clear for students to know what work they would have to do on a given problem. And when you come up with your answer, go ahead and put that up in a key that you keep somewhere on the board so that students can reference that if they need to. In the off chance that a student steps out of the room for any given reason, maybe a student has to use the restroom, or maybe they are arriving late to class for a certain reason, they had a meeting with a teacher from another class, after the class period was over, whatever the case might be, if anyone walks into the room and hasn't seen this information and just wants to jot down answers, again, we want to limit those number of in-class interruptions, and keeping a key in the corner of the board is a great way to do it. So for our second question, we'll talk through this. Zach, what do we do as our next step here? Add 7 to both sides. Great job. All right, that leaves us with 2x equals 13 plus 7. Laura, what does that give us? 20. Excellent work. And then Stacy, what's our next step? We divide by 2. Good job. Mike, what do we get as our final answer here? It was 10. Great work. We want to make sure that we go ahead and put that up in our key. So here we have two problems with the work clearly laid out. We have a space on the board available for us to stay out of the way of the work on the board itself. We have a key in the corner to prevent interruptions of students asking what the answer to a certain question is. And with all of that together, even in this quick examples with just these couple questions, it demonstrates a way that we can effectively space out our board, use meaningful colors, and try to minimize the number of in-class interruptions by providing that clarity to students. For more teaching tips, please feel free to check out our other videos, and thanks for watching.